I mean, I can confusion in one word. Yeah, I'm confused. Very.
Okay.
Confused.
I was gonna say the same thing actually.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess to expand on that, if you're not going to,
Yeah.
it was confusing to me because I could see where the motive for him writing the article came from, and I could understand it because I don't think anyone wants to be labeled as something they don't believe that they are. But there were definitely points in the article where I wondered what type of research he had done into certain issues. So I mean, I almost wished I could have spoken with him in person about what his, because it wasn't his opinion for me so much as the way he supported it, which confused me a lot.
Okay. I would say something along those lines too, because I feel like being in these conversations, I'm used to hearing what I feel like were the 2 points he was trying to maybe extrapolate from the article. I'm used to hearing those conversations, so when I read those articles, although I disagree with them, I may not particularly, even though I disagree with them, I don't necessarily have the feeling that, oh, like, this is necessarily, like, offensive or anything like that, but I feel like when I was reading it, I was confused because, one, like, though what he was trying to, the points he were trying to make, which are common points I hear, were, like, muddled in, like, a lot of things that I feel like were inflammatory for a lot of different communities.
Okay. Yeah, I was confused. It seemed to me like my initial reaction was that he was used to being in a place where, like, white privilege wasn't as much of a problem. Like, there weren't enough, at least my understanding from the article is that he wasn't in a community where white people were the ones that were, like, doing the oppression, if that's, like, the way we're thinking about it. And so when he came here, he felt, like, very personally, like, tied up in that, and he was used to being kind of an outsider to those race relations. But then he also mentioned in the article that, like, as a white person, I wasn't looked down on in China. I was just, like, an outsider. But then he also said, like a very, like, side comment of, like, black people in China were looked down on.
I noticed that too.
Yeah. So it seemed like he just didn't want to be implicated in it, but he understood that it was still happening. Like,
So aside from your personal reactions, what were some of the reactions you heard in your respective communities? What were some discussions happening after this column came out?
For me, I would say there's, like, particular lines that were very commented and, like, quoted when people discussed it, that, like, I feel sort of targeted particular communities. So, for example, if you're white, you're one of 4 things: gay, bisexual, transgender, or racist, which I think was something that was really commented on. Another thing I think was commented on a lot was, like, the 4 types of black people. That was something that was commented on initially. Like, and I think one of the things that was commented in a lot of our community was, like, some of them were, like, stereotypes we hadn't even particularly heard, like panhandlers was something we were just like, where did that come from? Because I've never heard that, like, word used as a description. So I think some of those key quotes were things that were discussed.
And I think also, speaking as a first-generation African student, to see wealthy Nigerian worn tonight. I mean, I expected pre-med, to be honest, but I don't know. It was interesting in that we are no strangers to this discussion of affirmative action not reaching those whom it was supposed to help. And we're definitely empathetic to that conversation, but in some ways it almost seemed underhanded in the way that it was thrown around. And I think that just speaks to, in some ways, my confusion with the article, because there seemed to be some kind of rhetorical leap between, I am demonized as a white person because people presume me to be racist, and let's now talk about black people wanting privileges based on the past that they didn't even experience.
And I think if his critique is that, like, that there are certain, like, stereotypes of people, then his response should be more of, like, okay, who are the people who aren't represented and what can we do to get them here? Not like a critique of the people who are here. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with
The
you.
whole thing was so confusing.
There were a lot of really dangerous, ideas that kind of subconsciously were, within that article. So, one, this idea that, racism is a thing of the past. It wasn't something that he said explicitly, but implicitly in the way that he dealt with a lot of these issues. It was definitely there, like the idea that because first-generation African students and second-generation African students did not experience the same levels of structural racism that, black students at this institution, their ancestors did. Well, those very black students that we're discussing did not experience those very same structural forms of racism that existed in the 60s and before that time. But we also acknowledge that these are things that are not only cyclical, but are still permeating in our societies today. We still have institutional racism, we still have prison industrial complexes, we still have schools that are not, the same, that are not equal when we look at different areas, and we still have very, segregated communities across the country. And so, I don't agree with that point. And, another thing that kind of ties into this whole idea that, socioeconomic status is now the racism of our time. You in some ways are comparing apples and oranges when we're talking about a poor white student and a rich black, Latina, or Asian student. It's not the same thing because, a poor black student and a poor white student have very different experiences, just like a rich black person and a rich white person also have very different experiences. How the racism manifests itself is different, and because one is more detrimental doesn't make it any less problematic.
I completely agree, and to go off of what you're saying, I think that there were two other things that I don't want to say he didn't understand, but it wasn't present to me in the writing. The fact that the type of racism that exists in America is also somewhat apparent on a global scale because of the history of imperialism and colonialism. So students who are from African countries may have actually experienced a similar type of racism if they were under a certain type of colonial rule, or if their grandparents experienced that. My family's from the Caribbean, for example. So while it's a little bit different because, the majority, at least in Jamaica, the majority of the population is black, so racism manifests in a different way. There are elements of colorism or classism or racism that are similar to what happened in the United States because there are ties between different places in the world. So it's not just an American thing. And the fact that he mentions that a black person would be perceived differently in China is also more evidence of that. And along with what you're saying, even if a person's from another country, they're in the United States now, so they experience that type of racism. People don't know my family's Jamaican when they see me. They see me as a black person or occasionally a mixed person, but they see me as someone of African descent.
Yeah, I very much identify myself as black because my experience has been peculiar to the black experience in America, even as a Nigerian American student. I have been called the N-word. I have had negative interactions with the police. And I don't think that my experiences are any less valid because my parents immigrated here in the 90s. So, I can't demonize him for what he doesn't know, but then to now publish an article where you're publicizing what you don't know, that's where it's really problematic.
I think another one that was really problematic to me was the lumping in of the entirety of the Asian diaspora into this group that doesn't benefit from affirmative action, or for that matter that the Asian diaspora is not disenfranchised anymore, when in reality you could talk to countless students here who are in the Asian diaspora who could really contradict that. And particularly when it comes to affirmative action, there's so many the group is so diverse that I feel like there's so many people that he could talk to who would completely directly contradict that. But that nuance wasn't in the article at all. It was many blanket statements throughout it.
I do personally think that well, this doesn't even have to be my personal opinion. Of course there are going to be people that maybe don't like white people, but there are going to be people that don't like black people, that don't like Asian people. So all of us are going to be put into positions where there's people that don't like us. But I think for him to make a blanket statement about that at Penn in general just feels a little bit odd, because in my personal experience that's not the case. And also I think that he's conflating people trying to deal with issues that just, they happen to be related to white people because of history. That's just a fact. But it's not meant to villainize white people in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I would say, like, yeah, I feel like he's, like, contriving, like, lumping in, like, the idea that individuals are trying to tackle the issues of systematic oppression, colonialism, and things like that into, like, hating or, like, not, or, like, feeling that all white people on campus are racist, which I don't think that's the point. I think people are having, like, active conversations about, like, these are the structural issues that minorities face when it comes to the variety of issues in society. And I think due to the fact that these conversations are, like, constantly had and they're a very large part of our university structure, he feels like that is, like, a direct opposition to, like, people, individuals, as opposed to people, as opposed to discussions on the structures. I feel like if you talk to students who are trying to tackle these issues, they're like, I'm not trying to, like, be combative toward individuals, because honestly, like, for me, when I'm thinking about issues, I'm not thinking about the individuals involved. I'm thinking about these are the structural things that are, like, put in place that are negatively affecting minorities. What can I do to stop them? Not necessarily individuals who may be, like, saying inflammatory things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to add on to, like, yes, like the structures are the most important thing, and like the history, like centuries and centuries of imperialism, like that's where we're at right now. So like, but to add on to that, also at the personal level, it was really frustrating for me because I was like, okay, this is an experience where you're walking into a situation and you are perceiving, whether it's true or not, that people have like these like boxes for you to fit into. And instead of that being a moment for him to say like, wow, like this is a moment where I can like, is it empathize when you? Yeah, where he could empathize instead of just say like, oh, like I understand that discrimination happens. This is like a learning moment where he can say, I don't appreciate that people make assumptions about me, so let me interrogate all the assumptions that I make about people on a daily basis. Because like we all have it. We're all humans who have come out of centuries of imperialism, and we all have ingrained ideas about other people on like a very reactionary basis. And so this is a moment for him to like interrogate those and be real with himself and be real with the people he's around. But instead he like is getting defensive, which I think. I mean, Fox News is all about it, right?
I mean,
so, yeah.
I definitely do, but this is where you jump into the discomfort and you engage critically in your environment. That's why you come to this university. And this is why I say there's a difference between me empathizing with him, not understanding, and then him publishing his, if I'm just going to be frank, ignorance.
And like, I do think that because of how the media is, because of how this, I don't want to say the system, but like because of how the system or the many systems in society are set up, it is easy for people to feel offended and feel reactionary. But that's also why I think it's important that people who are interested in the discussion speak out, because it's set up in a way that people will feel reactionary instead of sympathetic and instead of empathetic when they see their privilege being called out, or when they see people like them being spoken about in a certain way, because it wouldn't make sense for society to always have a conversation about privilege and about helping others who are disenfranchised, because society is already set up on that structure. So while I sympathize with people who feel offended, because it's obviously not coming from a place of hostility all the times, I think that that doesn't stop us from recognizing these issues.
So
I think, so another issue that I found in the comments especially, we're at Penn, so I assume everyone has a certain amount of intelligence or a certain amount of resources. You can easily go into Google and say multicultural groups at Penn, or cultural awareness at Penn, or racial awareness at Penn, someone like Jeremiah, who's obviously interested in this topic, who, as you said, wants to get involved or learn more about it, even if they haven't had this conversation, there are resources at Penn. So this is a more college-specific situation, but I think most colleges in the United States have a space where people who are interested can get more involved. Or, you know, if you don't have that space, you can Google American history. Or even American affirmative action, or American, and the concept of reparations, or you can read Ta-Nehisi Coates' article, and even if your opinion didn't change, you would have more of an understanding of why things are the way they are. A lot of us who speak about these issues, we don't just speak based on other people's opinions. We use like historical evidence to like support how we feel the way we feel, or why we think the way we think. And even myself, like my concept of race in America when I was in freshman year of high school is different from how it is now because of history class I've taken, because of even the fact that I took intro to sociology. There were some things that like I never noticed before. I was like, that's interesting. So it's not always the case of, like, not knowing is not an excuse, because if you're interested and you want to share your opinion, the opportunity is there. The resources are there. Like, we have the internet. If you're a Penn student, you go to Penn and there are groups, there are professors. There are so many things that are available to you to allow you to not be ignorant. Not in ignorance in the sense of just like not having information, not like an insulting way, but like.
Yeah.
Can we do it all together?
Can we define privilege first?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think let's take it one step at a time.
Whatever makes more sense for you guys.
I mean, okay, so I can't. White privilege and my idea of privilege are very different. So if we're just talking about privilege, I think of, you know, benefits afforded to somebody because of certain traits, attributes that they have, or means that they have. When I talk about white privilege, I think of something that is rooted in a structural advantage that one has due to the color or due to their race.
I would agree with that. I went to this a social justice conference in the Rocky Mountains this summer. And one of the things that I think really broke down what privilege and, in this specific case, white privilege was, is we did a program where we were like, what advantage groups do you belong to, what disadvantage groups do you belong to, and what privileges those groups have. So for example, I would be part of like the disadvantaged group of being black, however I would be in the advantaged groups of being like cis, able-bodied, and a man. So when I think about privilege, and then specifically white privilege, I think about white privilege as the systematic like benefits that an individual gets by being in an advantaged group in society, specifically being white.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think with going off that, it's important to realize that the privilege is not from the whiteness itself, it's what the implication of whiteness has in the type of society that we live in and the type of historical environment we live in. So another thing with the appearance of white people being villainized, it's not someone complaining about the fact that you're white or being mad at you because you're white specifically, it's someone pointing out the fact that society is set up in a way that being white has certain implications, whether or not it's happened in your lifetime or in your grandparents' lifetime. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, for me it's like super historical and it's super personal, because like there are like things that I think even people like who interrogate it constantly haven't even gotten to yet, that they have within themselves, of their idea of themselves and their idea of others, because of a history of like centuries of imperialism and colonialism. So like the slave dialogue master, like that isn't every person, but then it's also, yeah, so historical and personal, just in the sense that so it's all the structural things that you guys mentioned, and it's also on a very personal level of like, othering and stuff like that.
So I can talk specifically, really directly to when it comes to Dear White People. So I went to the I2M Harvard Black Division Conference, and there was a screening of it with Justin Simeon there. And one of the hugest things he said is that for him, at least, his goal in the movie would be to be the former, which is reaching out to other groups and engaging in these conversations through media. And he said, like, if you do anything, like, when you go see this movie again, like, please bring, like, a white person to see this movie as well, like, someone that you're friends with, so that other people can see besides ourselves, so we're not preaching to the choir. So I think the goal of these pieces of media are to engage with different individuals in regards to these. I don't think it's preaching to the choir. The question, I guess the question, like, the big question is, will that be able to happen? Will, like, will these conversations be engaged outside of these areas, or will, like, it be just to individuals who have a vested interest in them? I think it's a question that has yet to be answered.
Also, will people who aren't already involved in this conversation understand? Because just from, you know, being on social media or reading different articles, some people will see these videos and take it as being villainized or as reverse racism, or not in the way that it was necessarily intended, which is to bring awareness to the issues that disenfranchised groups may face. So while the goal might be there, I think that the effect is not always what it's meant to be. I think because of that, these types of media are supplementary. So these movies exist, or I didn't see the Columbusing video. These things exist, but they're just supplementary to the actual conversation, because understanding comes from the conversation. And in many ways, having a conversation is much better, because when you speak to someone, especially if you have like a face-to-face conversation, like a little conversation, helps that person be aware of, one, that these things exist, two, how these things exist, and three, like the point of this conversation. While someone just watching the movie by themselves, like a white person watching the movie by themselves, if they think that it's like attacking them, there's no one there to talk to them, they're just gonna leave with that like perception.
And like, it also...
Hang on one second. Wait until...